Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural edition of the Leadership Lounge. It's a feature that the MSOL program has started, so thank you to Doctors Cohen-Gilbert and Thurmer for getting this going, because this is a pretty big highlight in my academic career, as well as professional. I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight, but I just want to drop a couple of things first. We have, if you guys look in our MSOL OL 500 textbook, you'll see servant leadership, which is kind of what this guy's all about. We have a selfless leader who is empowering his followers, and I'm like totally claiming up here, and this is my boss.
Tells me so much.
So, excuse me. We have, I'm sorry about this. We have about a 12-year history. Mark brought me in, and we had, at the time, I believe there wasn't a position for me, and Mark said, I can find, I want you, and I can see the future. And I'm thinking, okay, pretty. You're thinking at that point, is this legit, or is this just somebody that's, just kind of telling you what you want to hear? So I'll fast forward. We're driving down, takes me on a ride one day in his SUV. We go down Riverside. This is about 12-ish years ago. Anybody remember Riverside Drive about 12 years ago? I honestly, and I'm not kidding, it was Goodfellas. I'm looking in the back for a bag of lime and a shovel, because I'm really thinking this is where where I meet my end. So we get down Riverside Drive, and Mark's showing me there's just tons. There's 29 oil tanks rotting, and there's a couple of these brick shanties that are down here. So without missing a beat, Mark goes, that right there, that's going to be our main campus building. That right there, that's going to be where we have the quad where students are going to be able to hang out and walk along the river. And I'm thinking, seriously? You can see that? So it's that type of visionary that we as employees certainly appreciate. As students, you guys should you'll get to appreciate it. But if you just look to your west, we're not here without this guy. And it was, for me, that was kind of like my aha moment, where I knew that it wasn't pie in the sky. It was legit. So, and I'll throw this little, in working with Mark for so long, I can't verify this. I know he was born on Long Island, but somewhere along the way, these DNA samples from P.T. Barnum, Willy Wonka, and Albert Einstein all kind of got together into a petri dish, and then out comes our leader. So tons of accolades, and I've got a list of accolades, of awards, from the Urban League to the Hartford Foundation. I mean, just stacks of them. So the moment I go into that, I can tell you now, without looking, Mark's rolling his eyes and shaking his head like, you're already 2 minutes too long on my introduction.
Way past.
So it's an honor. I'm humbled to be in this position to introduce this man. I'm not where I am without this guy right here. He pushes his folks. If you're not on board, get out of the way. We're here to serve our students. We've got the servant leader to show us the way. So please welcome, without further ado, President Mark Scheinberg.
Okay. Couple things strike me before I even start. Leadership is not a science at all. It's an art. It's something it's a craft that you work on, but typically it's not something that you get. I don't have enough letters after my name to be doing what I'm doing. I should not be here. In fact, most people who've been here for a while have no business being here. Most of us can never get hired into these jobs, except for the fact the job didn't exist until we got here. Because in the end, it's all about people. So my first point was that when Eric mentioned, I hired him and tried to figure out where he fits, that's not wildly unusual. Because typically, you find the right people, you'll get it right. You'll take a good teacher over a good curriculum every day of the week. And you know that. You know that if you have someone that doesn't have much written on a page, but they connect with you and they work with you, suddenly it comes alive. There have been cases over the years where we want to open up a satellite somewhere, and you're not really sure, and heck, demographically, there's 3 places that would work just fine. We actually have had the case where we put want ads into 3 different newspapers, and you pick where you're going to move based upon the people who answer the ads. Because you can make up for some problems in the demographics or the marketing. You can work around a lot of that. You can't work around the people. So that if you have that person who has that sort of passion and have that sort of interest, you can build the whole world around that. Another thing that came to mind, because I didn't know what the introduction would bring, if you've read any of Jim Collins' books, especially his early one, he talks about BHAGs. It's big, hairy, audacious goals. He said basically, not only are they important, but it is what motivates an entire organization. Nobody wants to be static where they are or work in a place that's static where it is. And so you have to create some opportunity to challenge yourself to something different. In my journey, I was 24. I was still single, which explains a lot. But I was 24, and when you're 24, you're bulletproof. I was working at Moore School of Business in Hartford. And this school came up for sale that did a lot of work with people with disabilities, which was Data Institute. It was a school of 4 students. It was a shell. A wonderful lady owned it, who became a real mentor of mine. She always thought she would pass it down to her daughter, who had cancer. And so suddenly, she did not know what she was going to do with her child. And that's exactly what it was. I came in there. It cost $30,000. And so I thought I was all that because I could cobble together $30,000. She looked at me, and it wasn't a matter of whether I could buy the place. It was whether I can adopt her baby. And so I ended up buying this thing and thinking I knew all that. And she stayed and actually taught me a lot of what I needed to know. And in fact, since the age of 24, I've gotten more ignorant almost every year. Because once you know what you know, you realize you're just scratching the surface. And so I don't think you do it early on without a little bit of craziness in your soul to say, I think I'll take that leap. I went 3 years without a paycheck. And I don't mention that because I feel bad for myself. It's worked out fine. But it's good to remind yourself that these things don't just happen on a platter. I know that I sometimes talk to young people and they think that first job is going to look like a vice president somewhere. No, it looks like what I went through. And so even though I could say I was a president of something, it really meant that when someone threw up in the bathroom, who do you really call? It would still be me. If someone showed up sick and who had to cover a class, that would be me. And so it was really quite something. I should also mention that I didn't grow up wealthy. I was never on welfare, but we still got the government, cheese and stuff. But it made you all at once very aware and appreciative of the plight of some of the students that we work with, because they're not them, they are me, just in the same circumstance, and we all walk the same path. But it gives you a feeling of appreciation that you would not have if I think it didn't go that way. And also coming from a poor background, you can't screw it up that bad. The worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're just back where you started. And being single at the time, I'd go get a job. I was playing a lot of music at the time. I was still out playing bands, and that's how I fed my family. As I got married and had kids, I'd go and still play 2, 3, 4 days a week. And in fact, I actually had experiences where people would come in when I was playing and not have any idea it was me, because it made no sense that I would be in that situation rather than something else. Back to the idea of BHAGs. Data at the time started growing. And so from being a this small little mom and pop, we had to get it accredited. That's how you get financial aid. You have to be accredited. And students who can't get financial aid are in trouble because they can't write checks. And so the economics of this industry, if you look at it that way, is that people have to have some help figuring out how to pay for school. So most of our students at that time, all those years, couldn't afford anything. Most of them came from agencies that we served. So most of our students, as I mentioned early on, had disabilities. We were getting money from the Bureau of Rehab Services. We were getting money from a lot of the state agencies. And we did amazing, amazing, amazing work. People got out in spite of all that. They got jobs. They did well. It's actually pretty wonderful. And even now when people are all impressed with what Goodwin has become, there's always a piece of me that says, no, you don't get it. We were great when we were working on the second floor walk-up of a building on Farmington Avenue. What was happening inside those doors was just as magic as anything that happened here. But people sometimes need to see it to believe it. So even though all that was going really well, it would not have been known. So here I am, I'm 62. I'm like one of those old jazz players in one of those smoky rooms that suddenly gets discovered. And so now it's the coolest thing in the world. Let me tell you something, it was cool back then. And the work we were doing was wonderful back then. The people who were around back then were loving students as every bit as much as we do. But it grew. We ended up with branches. We ended up being accredited. It ended up starting to make money. People said, why don't you become a nonprofit because we're doing so much nonprofit work? And I said, no, we're actually working a lot in collaboration with Urban League or Puerto Rican Forum or all these other organizations. And politically, if you wanted to go for a grant, if I went in as Data Institute and asked for $50,000, I might get the grant. But if I asked for $60,000 as Urban League, I was much more likely to get the grant, just politically. And so we partnered with all these nonprofits. At one point, we had as many as 8 or 9 nonprofits sitting together in the same classroom, because we were working for all of them, none of whom would talk to each other because it's so highly competitive, because they're fighting over this money. So they all got the money and then all gave it to us because we had all these classes working. And economically, it worked. And people said, why don't you become nonprofit? And the answer is that I would become competitive with the people who were working with me. So anyways, we grew as a for-profit. Now, for-profits have really bad reputations. Doesn't it? You think about for-profits, you think about University of Phoenix and every other bad thing that's ever happened out there. I'm old. I'll tell you, back in the day, you had great mom and pops. And you had lousy mom and pops. Like it was as diverse as the people who were running them. At the time, I was lucky. We ran something that was really wonderful and caring and wasn't making a lot of money, but was doing good work. And so we grew, started becoming somewhat more profitable. And in the 1990s, we decided that it would be really helpful if our students could go ahead and be able to go back to school easier than they could at the moment. And so we would send them off to college. We said, we'll get you a job, but you really got to go back to college. And they'd go back to college, and the college would say, that credit is worth nothing to us. It means nothing because you didn't go to a college to take those classes, and so you have to take the classes all over again. And it's a lot of BS if you've been in the field. You know that if people are back here learning what they're learning in manufacturing and what's involved with it, it has value on a collegiate level. But unless you're willing to give it credit and get outside your own head, you won't see that. It came to a head where we had one teacher here called Carol Grisette. I remember him really well. He taught for us and he taught for Capital. Same curriculum, same syllabi, same book, same teacher. You don't get the equivalence here. It's the same guy doing the same thing. And I finally went to Capital at the time. Ira Rubinsold was the president at the time. And I said, Ira, you can't tell me that the students coming out of this class that we're having shouldn't get college credit for this class. And he said, you're right. If they take the final here, we'll give them the credit. I said, okay, that's fair, but they have to pay the tuition. I said, okay, that's not about education anymore. That's a matter of who's getting cash for this person a second time for what they just paid for. And so we said, if the coin of the realm is to become a college, let's go become a college. And so that was our BHAG. because no one had transferred from what we were doing to a college in probably 40 years. Now understand, no one really wanted us to become a college. So this group of people who were all gifted in their own way, who had no business having this job at all, who did not have the letters after their name to get any credit or recognition from the people around, had something big to tie themselves to. And so what was interesting is that we kept on going back, getting beaten up, go back, get beaten up, told off every time. And finally, June 16th, 1999, almost our 20th anniversary, we were approved as a 2-year college in the state. What was more fascinating is in 2002, now that we were a college, we didn't have to be for profit anymore because we were already differentiated from all these nonprofits. And so we actually applied to the IRS to go nonprofit, which is an absurd thing to do. It's a very eccentric thing to do because essentially all of my family's wealth, probably 90% to be fair, we were giving away. So I had to actually get my kids together and say, I understand what I'm going to do here, because I'm not sure what you think your birthright is, but this is about to all go away on you. And they were good with it. We got them through college, and we donated it away under really tight rules that the IRS has to make sure that we couldn't be self-inured is the wording. You had to make sure that you had no value. I didn't even get to write it off. That's somehow it's one that always made me nuts. It's like, wait a second, I've been putting money into this for, at that point, 15, 20 years. I wasn't allowed to take a write-off. But look around you. Look what happens if the mission is bigger than what you have to get in the moment. Now, as a leader, as a leadership class, one thing this does is for many ways, gave me moral authority. If I'm talking to someone about what's important, there's some skin in this game. It's not like, well, this is what you guys should do, but I wouldn't. It's like, no, I've walked this walk. And when someone comes up and they do, and they try to minimize or diminish what we do, and by extension what you do, it's like, no, I don't have energy for that kind of conversation anymore. So the question here is again, what can I give you about leadership that matters? The first thing as I started is that there are good people around you. There are people that you're already working with that are leaders now that you appreciate and honor. There are people that you work for or you work around that you see are somehow making a difference. I would ask you to take the time to have a conversation about what they think that is, sort of like we're doing here. And you're going to find out that the people who are like that are in large part willing to subrogate themselves to something that's much more important than just them. It also matters, I really believe, that you don't take yourself that seriously. It's all about the team. When I first got to this point, we used me as a hook. This great story about this guy who had this nonprofit, the story I just gave you, a great hook for a newspaper article. The problem is that it creates the possibility of sort of a hero worship. You have the situation where, okay, well, Goodwin's great. What happens when Mark leaves? I mean, does a place even really exist anymore? And so if you look really carefully, you'll notice that over the last 5 or 10 years, I'm not in most of the articles. And that's by design. Is that my 20 minutes?
No, that's your 15. Sorry.
Oh, 5 more minutes. I'm just... This is a system we're working out. This is the first...
She was so into your message.
Yeah. Good catch. Good catch. I'm with you. But in any case, you find that it becomes very humbling and very important to get the team that you're working with and letting them get credit. People, when they feel unsafe or fearful, when you're going out to an interview, the tendency is to tell people everything about yourself. It's all about telling than asking questions. And so when you're in an unsafe situation, what you tend to want to do is make sure they know that you deserve and you belong and you have all this to offer. And you have to do that to a point. but it becomes so much more powerful if you can figure out ways to engage the person you're with. Those of you that are younger and some that might still be single, you go on a date the first time, if you want to really impress the person you're going out on a date with, just ask questions. You don't have to tell them a thing about yourself. And at the end of the night, they'll say, "Oh, what a good guy. He was so nice." They don't have a clue. What they do know is that you care about what they're thinking. And it's no different in all of this. If I come and I tell people what I think, then what's the purpose in having a conversation? But if I go and I ask what's working for people and what's not, whether I can fix it or not, it becomes a thing where, okay, he gets it, he's trying to find me where I am, he's trying to figure out what my life is about, and then some pretty special things happen. If you can't create a good environment, it will cost you money. People will work for you even in a bad environment, but you got to pay them off. So people will stay places they hate if they're getting paid enough money. It's a real sort of bad economy. But I want to point that out to you because it happens. We lose people to places like that. And then 6 months later, they'll say, geez, I hate where I am, but it's hard to say no sometimes to a lot of money. And once they do it, they figure out how to try to pull back in. So the environment matters. And also the people, if they're happy with you, if they feel like they're working with you, it draws to the bottom line, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit. All the studies I've ever been in prove that if you look at the happiness of your employees and the happiness of your customer, it's exactly in parallel, within a couple of percentage points of each other. It's empirically correct. So if people are happy and feel part of the mission, students will feel happy and part of the mission. And if I can't get to every student, I can get to everyone who's touching students and make that a little bit more special. I'm going to stop speaking because you have a system that you have that I don't want to screw up here. No, because then if I answer questions, it's going to go on forever and ever, and it's going to be terrible.
You're in the hot seat now.
Is that a hot
Right
seat?
here.
I don't want to be.
You're facing the masses.
Okay. Some of you are more massive than others. So I have to pick on you.
So we have 3 questions
3 questions.
that we're going to ask our president. The first question we have is, what is the most important lesson you've learned about leadership?
I think I sort of alluded to it. I really think the lesson is to be authentic. They'll say that in lots of different ways. No one has this figured out. None of us have it figured out. If you're green, you grow, and if you're ripe, you rot. So that I find that if I am able to be authentic, if I'm allowed to say to someone, I don't know, if I'm allowed to be vulnerable and care and not know the answer, it means a whole lot more than acting like you were spitting out every answer. Because you won't have it right. If you think you have it figured out, it's over. So, but if you're at least in the process of trying to figure out together, it'll buy you a lot of time, and people will actually respect that a whole lot more. So that would
I'll add, because he's too humble and modest, transparency. For someone that runs an organization, Mark's probably one of the most transparent people I've ever worked with, and that is a trait that I think, now granted, Mark used to be in on almost all the hirings, right? But as we've grown, we try to find bits and pieces of Mark in people that join the organization. But and it's that transparency leadership that you can see that really resonates with the colleagues, staff, faculty, administration. So I know you wouldn't say that. You're too humble. So
no, it's not being. I mean, it's true. There is. I told you I played music for a lot of years. When you're first doing it, you want to make everything as perfect as you can. But I'm behind a microphone a lot of the time. And every now and then I'll screw something up really badly. There was a time when I would be horrified. It can still happen, I can be horrified, but for the most part, I think it's hilarious. Because if you do it enough, you just know that the moment will pass, but you have that moment of saying, that was the dumbest thing that ever came out of my mouth. And and people will take it for what it is. So being transparent gives people license to be with you. It's trust.
Good answer.
Thank you.
Okay, second question. What are 3 words you would describe, would you use to describe leadership today?
Now, understand, leadership is different than governance, and it's different than control. It has nothing to do with control. Leadership is something quite different, because what you're asking as a leader is that for people to follow you, whether or not you have control over them. If control is where you lean towards, then you've lost it. So for leadership, the kind of words that I would probably lean on would be passionate. Passion is contagious. I would say that if you can actually inspire people to be their better selves, there's something wonderful about that, because we all aspire to that. If someone has to follow you to a place worse than where they are, then why would you do that? But if everyone's trying to do better, including myself, it gives everybody permission to try to do better and know that they won't. And the last one that I sort of alluded to is probably vulnerable, because you don't get to have trust without vulnerability. And so if you want people to trust you, you have to be willing not to have the answers. You have to be willing not to try to be that smart. So I think those are the words that sort of come out the loudest.
How are those different from when you were an up-and-coming leader? That doesn't count as one of the questions, by the way. It's just curiosity.
It's funny. If I think back, we were small. We were relatively desperate. There were more than a few weeks when you said to people that you knew well enough, can you really hold on to your paycheck until Tuesday because the state check hasn't come in and they promised it and it didn't get here? And I felt in many cases, because of the weight of this thing, that you were selling all the time. And again, when you're selling all the time, you lose the ability to stop and ask lots of questions. And so good that you're in movement, and good that you're pushing, and good that you're going along. But it looks different now because we can afford to let it look different. I'm allowed to stand back and say, okay, people, you have a reputation for this. People will find us to do some of the things we want to do rather than us having to initiate it. It's an interesting thing. A lot that you see that happens here that's very different doesn't happen because it's something that I or anybody around has initiated. People come in the door and say, you guys are the kind that can do this. What about this idea? I'm looking at Cliff when I said that. He's in this position where once you have a reputation for being willing to try stuff, people will rely upon that reputation. And so it gets to be less hard work. And I mentioned earlier that people, especially people with less imagination, have to see something. At Goodwin right now, they're seeing something. I often tell people that we're given pieces of a puzzle, but we don't get them in order. And so when they keep on going down, you can't make out what it is until you get enough pieces there. Sometime in the last couple of years, there's been enough pieces that people can see the outlines of what this thing might be able to be. But that doesn't mean any of the pieces were wrong. They just don't come in the order that people want them to come in. And they never come that way, by the way.
Excellent. Okay, final question. What's your next act?
I live in a very blessed situation, because what this job is that I've been at for 38 years is one that I have the ability and to change to be whatever it is I want it to be. Now, stop and think about that. I might not be able to do everything I want to do and do it as the president of this organization. And in fact, it would probably not be healthy for this organization that I'd be president too long. But if we did work a couple of years ago trying to put a school up in Ghana, which, by the way, failed terribly. But if I have passion to do something like that, I can do it while this thing is still happening, because I have a platform or foundation to do other things. So the quick answer is, yeah, I'll get to do other things, but it'll probably be with some version of my same job, which most of the people you ever ask that question to will not be able to answer that because you don't have a structure that you're in that allows you to do that.
Excellent. Thank you. How about a round of applause for our president?